Zach, there was a survey that we were talking about early this morning that kind of caught our attention here as we continue to follow what's been playing out with this pandemic and these new restrictions that are taking in place in places like California, now New York with indoor dining, which is the impact that this is all having on restaurants. The National Restaurant Association out with a new survey that points to some pretty troubling numbers for an industry that is really a big backbone for the economy here. 110,000 restaurants that have already closed permanently throughout the 8, 9 months of this pandemic. 500,000 restaurants, according to the NRA here, saying are now in economic free fall. And one of the things that we've talked about a lot with some of the bigger companies, but this certainly is even tougher for these smaller businesses, which is the cost of staying open here. And that number, climbing expenses, 59% of operators saying their total labor costs are higher than pre-pandemic. And we raise this now in December, of course, because there was this big hope when things started to open back up in the summer that these restaurants would be able to make enough money to be able to sustain their business at least through year end. But when you look at these new restrictions that have taken place, there's no question a lot of the restaurants are going to take a big hit, and many of them will not survive.
Yeah, and I mean, we've been hearing that for a while now. It's not new, right? We've been talking with the CEO of OpenTable earlier this year. Their numbers was about 1 in 4 restaurants across the country expected to close permanently. I mean, that's just a staggering number when you think about how many communities are impacted by this. Of course, you can talk about the hardest hit regions, whether it's New York or Illinois, in terms of restaurants seeing some of the pain here, but even backing up, 37% saying that it's unlikely the restaurants going to be around in the next 6 months without additional support here. So you really can't overstate how much pain is being felt in the industry. And I think, to me, one of the key aspects that's not talked about enough here is kind of treating some of the bigger restaurant chains similarly to some of these small businesses. You think about mom and pop shops and how much money is poured into these businesses from companies or from families, rather, that don't necessarily have other backstops or other wells to tap into here. And it's something we talked about earlier when this pandemic first hit. You can look at some of the larger operators here, Darden being one of them, the parent company of Olive Garden. That stock's up for the year quite sizably when you think about, I should say, since the March lows, it's up pretty substantially. So, I mean, when you think about the resources available to some of these larger chains, I don't think we should be looking at everything the same, considering they might be a little bit better situated once we come out to the other side.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right about that. And Zach, I keep thinking back to these conversations that I had with a lot of these small restaurant owners right when the pandemic hit, the early days in New York, where they said, look, on average, as an independent restaurant, you only have about 2 to 3 months of reserves, if that you operate on. And you just imagine the sudden closure that came about. There were, in fact, loans out there, emergency loans that many of these tapped into. That certainly wasn't enough to be able to sustain for a very long haul. And many of these businesses now have additional debt because they did, in fact, invest in outdoor dining, for example. I mean, you've seen the big build outs that we've seen in places like New York City, but so in addition to the losses that they sustained, now they've got additional investments they had to make, and then to be told that they have to now shut down is certainly a very difficult reality to swallow. I thought it was interesting earlier today when we talked to Dr. Amesh Adalja from Johns Hopkins, saying that, look, there's not a whole lot of science that supports the fact that the spread right now of the virus is happening in outdoor dining, and yet a lot of governors, for example, are having to impose these restrictions because they simply don't know how to get control of the virus immediately. And so automatically these businesses get looped in. But it's certainly going to be a tough go. And we're going to keep a very close watch on that, especially, to your point, the mom and pop restaurants that we have been speaking to.